Hi and welcome to HD Morf, the channel dedicated to the source of the mechanical knowledge of human design. In this series we will delve into the depths of the individual lines for each or the 64 gates of the Rave I Ching as described by Ra Uru Hu. The structure of every video contains general information about the gate as well as details for each line. Each gate represents a separate hexagram. We will start with a description of the hexagram line structure and the detailed meaning of the first line, followed by the general description of Gate 41 and its first line. Hexagram line structure. Awareness is something that is of enormous importance to all of us. We are going into a very deep level into the nature of the lines. First we have to come to grips with the nature of the hexagram and how it operates. A hexagram is made up of two trigrams, a lower and an upper trigram which is made up of 3 lines each. They have a distinct relationship to each other. The first line, which is the base of the lower trigram, the ground floor of the base trigram, has a similar relationship to the fourth line, which is the baseline of the upper trigram. There is consistent relationship between the lower and the upper trigram, but their functions are different and the nature of their wave and frequency is different. Human design is a logical process which is rooted in the capacity for things to be organized. We do not live in an organized world. That is, we have a structure of patterns that we overlay over the subjective chaos at different areas, beginning at the most mundane level with our relationships, whether they are personal or transpersonal. The nature of human design and the information that we will share with you in terms of how the lines work. When we look at the emotional system, we look at the nature of the waves, and we see that in the emotional system there are 6 different waves which are generated by the 6th gate being the motor gate of the solarplex system. Out of that gate come the different waves, different gears in the emotional system. There is a parallel to this on the other side. You should keep in mind when we go through this process of looking through the awareness frequencies from the 1st to the 6th, that they are in resonance and harmony with the 6 emotional waves. In other words, the first emotional wave and the first awareness frequency belong to each other. First lines. Let's look at these lines as archetypes first. Archetypes in the sense of their structure within the hexagram structure. The keynote of all first lines is introspection. Now think about what a first line really represents. The first line is the base and the foundation which the house will stand on. First of all, it is the most primitive aspect, the most fundamental aspect. It is the starting place of the hexagram process. The foundation is rarely something that we see. The foundation is hidden and everything else is built upon it. One of the things to recognize about the nature of all first lines is that because they are introspective, the first line is always demanding that you understand the nature of the hexagram. In our language, if you have the first line, the first responsibility is to understand what the gate is. It is not about understanding the gate across. It is not about understanding the circuit that it belongs to. It is about focusing on its essential nature, because this is the foundation. If the essential nature is not there in the foundation, the house will not be stable. First, hexagrams are primary. Wherever you have a first line, it is going to take you time to get to the point where you have established that introspection to a level where you are comfortable with the nature of that gate. It is not something that is comfortable on day one. It is something that you have to grow into because you need to explore it. First lines are not in a hurry to jump out because they are introspective. They are looking inward. The nature of all first lines is to establish the basis. When you look at the frequencies of any hexagrams, each line is keynoted by the names of the streams. The first 2 lines are tribal awareness frequencies. They are rooted in the word instinct. The first line says, the instinct for strengths or weaknesses. Think about the first line emotionally. It is the emotional wave of weakness and strength. When you come over to the instinctive side, what you have is an awareness that can existentially recognize weakness and strength. This is the foundation of introspection, the recognition of weakness and strength. When one is weak, one needs to continue to look inwards because the foundation is not solid. When one is strong and the foundation is strong, then one can look to what is above in the next floors, what is across the street in the next house. This is the nature of this, and this is the instinct to recognize weakness and strength not simply within oneself but in others. One can recognize instinctively the weakness or strength in somebody else's foundation. The first line is very basic. It establishes the foundation and the wave of that frequency is always that movement between weakness and strength. In the case of the first line, Theoretically, you are always starting weak. It takes time to build a foundation out of the first line. Hexagram 41. Keyword, decrease. Theme, contraction. Center, root. The pressure centers are of enormous importance, like all things. We are basically a sandwich. You have a pressure above and a pressure below, and everything else is just squashed in the middle. Those pressures rule the nature of the world that we live in. They fuel all of the basic potentials of what it is to be in a body, of what it is to live out the consciousness of being a human being. They are essential and they are always present. When I say they are always present, that is not a matter of whether you have them personally in your design, or not. As long as it is in the world, it is a part of the aura of the world and everybody gets in contact with it. So in looking at these pressure centers, please understand that we are looking at the fundamental root of all human processes. In that, the fundamental source of pressure is necessary to initiate all of these processes. The 41st hexagram is the fuel or the pressure of an abstract stream in the sensing circuit, the stream of feeling. This stream is a uniquely human stream. It is the evolutionary and genetic material necessary for us to experience incarnation in a human form. Without this stream, the human evolutionary process would not exist. Not only are we speaking here of a fundamental pressure for our life process, but in particular, to understand it is not shared with any other form of life. This is a very specific pressure and a very specific stream that is directly associated with what we experience as being human. The 41st hexagram, as a codon in our genetic code, is the only initiating codon. In other words, it is an initiating codon in the sense that it is at the beginning in the genetic structure of everything. Thus, in beginning with the 41st hexagram, with the most important pressure in our evolutionary process now and ever since we became Homo sapiens, or modern humans. The 41st hexagram is the trigger that brought us into the stage that we are in, and we are still going towards completion. What is unique for us as human beings is the capacity to be able to feel. This capacity leads to the need, the desire for experience. The desire for experience to be able to feel and manifest that feeling is the human evolutionary process. It is what drives us from one experience to the next, until we develop through that process. It also brings into play the nature of crisis. In other words, it tells us very clearly that the evolutionary process is rooted in crisis, change and transitoriness. The 41st gate, decrease, is the gate of contraction, and it says, the fuel in which there is the energy to feel, or not. So the whole capacity to feel, the complete potential that exists in our genetic spectrum, is rooted in the 41. In our work in looking at sexuality in human design, the 41 is the gate of fantasy, the capacity to be able to fantasize the feeling itself because all the feelings lie there. The old Chinese image of the 41 hexagram was the gardener who would cut back the garden in the winter time or fall, to prepare it for the following season. By cutting it back, nothing was lost, because all the potential of that plant, everything that that plant could possibly be, every twig, every leaf and every flower was already there within it, contracted inside, held inside as a potential. So the 41st gate carries with it this enormous potential for any kind of experience. This is the key to what it is to be human. Its mechanic is that it is always about hunger. A human being is so different from its animal kin. They only have one kind of hunger, basic, predatory hunger to stay alive. But human beings have a duality in that. We have the material hunger, the hunger for survival, but we also have this other hunger, the deeper one, the human hunger for experience. To go to Mars and see what the rocks look like. What for? Just to see what the rocks are. To discover America. What for? Just to see what is there on the other side. So the first thing to recognize is that the basic fuel, the fundamental fuel for the evolutionary process, is the hunger to feel. The whole key to being an abstract being, whatever kind of abstract definition you have, is that the essential understanding about life is rooted in something very simple. One step after the other, don't repeat your steps. So look at what that really is saying, like the 64th gate in the Aina, because there is so much potential information. Built into these gates is a mechanism that is ready to release only one at a time. In other words, all those feelings are built up within the nature of the 41 as a resource. But if you look above the lines in the white book, it says, the limitation of resources which maximizes development of potential. If you have all these fantasies running around inside of you, it will diminish your potential. If you focus your energy, the name of this channel, on one fantasy, on one feeling, then you can move through that. And when it is over, you can go on to the next one. This is the key to the abstract process. This maximization of that potential by recognizing that this resource is always there. You don't have to have all the fantasies all the time, you can have one at a time and go through what is the correct evolutionary process. Remember, when you are looking at a hexagram, the first line is always going to represent not simply the foundation of the hexagram, but its essential truth. Gate 41 line 1, reasonableness. The first line is reasonableness. You can't have all of your fantasies because you will lose your power. You must get one and then go on to the next. Reasonableness becomes the key. The appropriate delegation of responsibility. The first line is looking inward. It has no capacity to look outward. It is interested in what the essential mechanism is. What is fantasy? Is the question that the first line always asks. When the first line of the 41 is a child, they want to know what the difference is between what is real and what is fantasy. They want to grasp that right away. What is fantasy? The proper delegation of responsibility is the theme we have just been looking at. Remember, that we are dealing with the root center, with the adrenaline hormone, the stress hormone. The root center carries with it enormous power. There is a tremendous fuel at work here. So the appropriate delegation of responsibility is how to use that energy. In other words, what fantasy, what feeling do you focus on? Don't get caught up in just seeing that fantasy. If you are somebody who is focusing on feeling good about the day and feeling bad about your work and you are a 41.1, you will be very uncomfortable. Either focus on the good feeling that it is a nice day or focus on feeling bad because you are at work, but do not try to focus on both of them. It will not work for you. It will not be productive for you. It will not be a healthy fueling of your potential. Remember the mirrors, the dualistic interplay in design. The splenic system is our immune system. It is our protection from disease. We know that it is all about health. But recognize as well that the solarplex system, this powerful motor emotional system, there is illness that strikes it as well, emotional illness, emotional unhealth, lack of balance emotionally. When these fuels are properly recognized and you live out their nature, then the solarplex, the emotional system, benefits from that and it becomes healthier. It is getting a healthier fuel, if you will. These are pressures, and they carry with them a great deal of force. I would have used the word conditioning, but I do not want to confuse you. This power carries a great deal of force. This line has Neptune exalted. The imagination to make the very best out of very little. You don't need to have all the feelings to get everything out of it. One focused feeling can take you all the way, always will, always can. That Neptunian side tends to be people who are much more caught up in the fantasy of the 41, the Neptunian quality of that. Anybody who has Neptune there has it veiled automatically. Think about that, the foundation is automatically veiled. So it can be very mysterious and it tends to be about fantasy on the non-manifesting side. The mercurial side, a tendency in understanding to assume capability, leading to strain. I always tell people with the 41st gate, it is wonderful for you to have this feeling, this fantasy inside, but don't ever think that there is more for you. Remember, that everything about the abstract stream is about our process of expectations. If you do one step after the other, you assume that you will get somewhere, because that is the nature of the abstract process. The assumption of capability is when you look inside and you see you have this fantasy, and you think that because you can fantasize it, you can do it. I can fantasize making love to Martians. But I will not be able to do it. The reality is that for these people this is often very difficult. You can see it in the white book. It talks about coolness and the hothead. The cool and hot of the pressure to feel. This is the fundamental duality in fantasy. They are either cool or hot fantasies. Coolness, where the energy to release feelings is selective. In other words, one is clear about one feeling at a time. By the way, these feelings can come very quickly, but as long as they are one at a time, it is okay. The hothead, The urge to release feelings. What happens to these people is that they can get into a great deal of trouble in life because they have within them this need to feel out what is essentially nothing more than a fantasy, with very little odds of realizing them. Remember that only the 4th to 6th lines really have the skills to integrate with the energy on the other side. The first line is simply there to look into the nature of the feeling, of the fantasy, but the moment it is trying to live that out, it will get a lot of crises. If they are truly emotional people, they will enjoy their crises anyway. The 41st gate is a potential to release your own feelings, and it is also a potential to condition the release of feelings in others. So when you are looking at this process, the first thing to recognize about the very first step is that human evolution was rooted in, focus on the feeling, and then you get the experience. That is how you learn. If you are sitting there and you have a zillion feelings, you do not move. There is no way to go. So the very first thing that distinguished us was the capacity to have a feeling, the fantasy to focus on that and hold that focus until the potential, the 30th gate at the other end, to begin a process of actually manifesting that as experience, was there. This concludes the description of Gate 41, Line 1, Reasonableness. Stay tuned for more human design content from HD Morf.